Welcome to the Global Discussion, a discussion with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. Today, a real pleasure to be joined by Morgan Roth. Morgan, you're very welcome to the show. Before we get into the topic we've got to talk about today, let's maybe start by asking you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background and the role that you do today.
Oh, glad to do that, Simon. Thank you. My name is Morgan Roth. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at the Muscular Dystrophy Association. I am pleased to say that this is the job to which I have always aspired. It is such a privilege to lead such an iconic brand in this new and exciting age. So I'm really thrilled to be in the position I am. But I had a fun time getting there. I've worked all over the world, which I think is so important in the field of marketing and communication, to really flex your communication muscle and understand different styles and nuance to communication around, across cultures. So I think that really served me well over the course of my career. And I ventured into international education, but I've spent the bulk of my time in the nonprofit space, and more recently focusing my efforts in the rare and neuromuscular disease community, as my role at Muscular Dystrophy Association certainly implies. So it's been a terrific ride. I am somebody who lives with a neuromuscular disease, so it very much feels like home to me. I feel like I've come home after a 30 some odd year career.
Well, very good. And thank you for sharing that with us, Morgan. It helps just for people listening to us or watching us around the world. It helps them to understand what our discussion is going to touch on today. Obviously, it's always great to talk to a fellow chief marketing officer. Before we get into it, let me ask you a little bit about the nonprofit world. I've been involved on a board of a nonprofit for a short period of time, and I found that it can be quite cyclical. The economy kind of impacts things as well, because you need donations, you need support, you need, whether it's high net worth individuals or grants or government subsidies. What's that ebb and flow like for you at this moment in time in this sort of busy, complex world we're in?
Sure, and only getting busier and more complex as we speak. We really try to be very relationship and connection focused. Connectivity is our core value, our standout core value, because you want to bring your service community and your stakeholders along with you, no matter the weather. So we want to make sure that people are deeply invested in what we do, how we do it, and the impact and momentum that we're building. So even when seas are rough, they still feel that affinity and commitment to the work we're doing and don't want it to stop. So again, our goal is really to be consistent throughout crises and times of wealth and bounty, to make sure that our work doesn't have to slow or stop, because we've got such tremendous momentum in our sector right now. And so many people are depending on the science and advocacy and community building work that we're doing. I certainly don't want to be the one to say we're going to suspend this or that because, we just don't have the funds to do it. And my colleagues feel the same way. So, we stay very focused on our cherished stakeholders, continuing to give them great experiences, keeping them well informed, and showing them the impact of their dollars invested in the Muscular Dystrophy Association.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. And when it comes to things like, the care that you can provide to people, the information, the knowledge sharing, and of course, you mentioned things like research, for example. I'm just wondering whether this AI world that we find ourselves in today, is that impacting you from a nonprofit perspective? Is it helping or hindering, or are you using AI in any shape or form at this moment in time?
We are, and we're looking to do more. From a marketing perspective, it allows us to give people experiences without leaving the comfort of their home necessarily. And we love to bring the impact of our work to them directly. So we are incorporating and adopting more and more AI into our marketing arena, but also in research. And, I feel like we're just at the tip of the iceberg. The ability to use AI to unravel such complex diagnoses as neuromuscular disease and rare disease. And one of the most vexing hindrances in the rare disease, and especially the neuromuscular disease spaces, there isn't a common experience in these diseases like ALS or Charcot-Marie-Tooth syndrome, which is something that I have. There are degrees, there are different limbs or organs or nerve groupings that are effective. Nobody has exactly the same experience. So AI gives us the potential to really personalize diagnoses and down the road treatment options and hopefully cures. So they're very specific, not just to your disease, but to the disease that you have and the genetic code and makeup that has triggered this disease in your system. And that is just going to be a whole new day in medicine, certainly, but especially in our field, which is really emerging. Knock wood.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And it's always great to hear AI for good stories. So thank you for bringing that up. I really like that. Um, while we're on the non-profit discussion, because I do want to bring in a couple of other topics as well, but I know that you're focused on something called dignified non-profit narratives. And I'm just wondering for our audience, because we've got creatives, leaders, thinkers, and everything in between tuning into this show. When we talk about dignified non-profit narratives, what exactly do we mean, Morgan? Could you maybe unpack that a little bit for us?
Sure. I think at the highest level, what it means is recognizing the agency and dignity of the people that we serve. What dignified narratives really alludes to is making sure that we recognize the agency and the dignity of our service population and the people that we serve. Back in the day, the practice was largely exploitative. Um, and we looked as fundraisers often to raise money by making people feel guilt or the necessity to give, because they felt sorry for somebody. And the tack that I take and that we've adopted at the Muscular Dystrophy Association and that I see trending, thank God, is really again a much more dignified approach where we're asking our donors not to throw money at a problem, but to invest in a solution. And that is a good news story to tell. And that is really where we're taking our fundraising efforts at the Muscular Dystrophy Association and bringing our service community along with us, because this is something that shows them to be not people who need to be fixed, who are broken, but people who really have rich and fulfilling lives, lots of potential. And we, as the Muscular Dystrophy Association, want to expound on that. That is exciting. And that is something that is sustainable in terms of fundraising. It's not that one-off gift because there was such a compelling picture it made your wife cry and now you want to give. This is, hey, we are onto something really great with these people. They're really redefining what it means to live with a neuromuscular disease, and they're really redefining scientific opportunities to break through those mysteries of the body and of our neurological systems and make life better. Provide people with more independence, the ability to, we always say, love longer and live stronger. And that's the direction we go in.
Well, I love that saying. I mean, that's a great turn of phrase, and it is interesting because obviously in the non-profit world and in sort of the charitable sectors of old, there was an awful lot of emotional strings being pulled because you desperately needed the money to support a cause. But it is wonderful to hear words like solution and dignified and moving on, as you say. Thank goodness. Because it is really good to be able to frame it maybe from a marketing perspective that conversation has moved on and maybe moving the mindset a little bit, and people feel obviously feel good about being able to support being a donor or being able to provide that financial commitment to help a cause. I'm sure people who are affected by it, of course, it comes into their lives more, and they understand, particularly if they have friends or relatives that are close to them that have been affected. by whatever area it is that a nonprofit supports. But it is also important, isn't it, that we reach a wider net, because we have to make sure that we can continue to do the great work that we do in a nonprofit world.
You're right.
And on that, it's a nice segue into the next thing I want to ask you about, which is leadership, because nonprofits sometimes, you're audited, your management structure, how you fund yourselves, all that stuff has to be very transparent, and rightly so. But getting the right people in place to help an organization to succeed, whether it's in the nonprofit world or the other sectors, industry sectors. And I'm interested in a topic because I know you're a founding member of the Chief Network, which is well known. A lot of people will be familiar with that, and you were one of the early people involved in that. And I know you also won a Top Woman Award, and that was in the field of sort of communication and leadership. But when it comes to leadership, women in the workplace, and that sort of side to your area of expertise, I know you could maybe share a little bit of insight there, which I'd be interested to hear.
I'd love to. I think as I've matured through my career, and have seen more and more women enter leadership roles in the nonprofit sector in particular, I'm curious to always understand what made them successful, what drives them, and what keeps them at the top of their game. And it's really a matter of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. We can never stop learning. And akin to the conversation we just had about dignified narratives, when you know better, you do better. And over the course of 30 years, you can imagine the transitions in technology and channel development in trends. Our audiences largely don't have time to sit through a 5 or 7 minute video. They need that in 25 seconds. They need that takeaway. And if they stay for the next 35 seconds or however long it is, that's icing on the cake. But we always have to be comfortable changing up what we're doing, understanding nuance that is emerging. I don't think in the nonprofit world we have ever had the degree of external influences that we have now. We're dealing with a heavily politically polarized world right now, and now we're seeing that polarization emerge in lifestyles that people choose to live, and wealth pockets. So it's always important to stay on top of that and be flexible and agile enough with your strategies that you could accommodate that change and keep continuity going, because we know it's continuity that builds your brand and your brand equity. So knowing that about women, I'm thinking, what is the magic sauce here, or the secret sauce behind their success? And a lot of it is the ability to collaborate. We all know that Marcom cannot exist in a vacuum. We are largely a service provider to our mission teams. So the ability to collaborate is really important, and how you collaborate equally important, because women of my age group were largely socialized to prioritize harmony. We tread lightly. We defer to the power base in the room. We do not come forward with our needs and expectations. We work with what we have. And women who are successful are changing that narrative. And we are being more assertive, and we are talking about our needs. And we're not always deferring to the power base. We're challenging the power base sometimes. And I think that is a really important skill for women leaders, aspiring leaders, to get comfortable with, because it is a new world. I'm writing right now an essay about being nice. And I had an incident not so very long ago where somebody said, she's not very nice. And the first thing I felt when that came back to me was shame. I don't want to be a person who is not kind and not nice. And then I felt guilty about it. How did I make this person feel? But then I started recalling the interaction. And then I got angry because I wasn't not nice. I set a boundary, and I wasn't difficult to work with. I said no to something that was valid and that I could document my reasons for it. it. So that expectation that we are meek and that we go along has to go away. Because to be a real leader, you have to call out the problems. You have to call out that iceberg that you see coming. You have to be able to speak up, and you have to get comfortable with challenging and setting boundaries. So, that's something that I'm really focused on now, is how do we bring our daughters and women behind us up in a world and make it safe for them to say, hey, wait a minute, I've got a problem with that, or I can see a hole in that strategy. Let's talk about ways to fill it, and not be labeled for doing that as difficult or problematic or talks too much. So that's where my headspace is at in the
Well,
leadership camp
look,
right
I
now.
think it's a great point that you raise. I was only talking to somebody on a previous episode about funding, for example, in the tech sector, and what a small percentage, like, tiny percentage of the actual funding goes to women founders, from a VC perspective or an investor perspective. And then you look at things like the FTSE 100 or the S&P, and the amount of women that are actually leading companies, it's still not fair or balanced. And it is interesting in some of the points that you've made as well, between sometimes leaders have to make not necessarily popular decisions, but the right decisions that helps everybody. And how, again, back to how that's framed and how that's perceived, and setting boundaries, and being able for that to be articulated is really important. And also maybe a bit of a mindset change still required in a few corners of the work environment. But it is refreshing to hear that. And I know that you're involved in that, and it is really, really an important topic when it comes to leadership, because ultimately, even though we talked about AI a moment ago, it's humans dealing with humans still, isn't it? It's about relationships and getting things done collectively, which is
And
what
authenticity, bringing
yeah,
your true
yeah,
self to the table and speaking your mind, not being ashamed of your expertise, or your wit, or, your ability to forecast or predict really effectively.
yeah, no, couldn't agree more. That's great. The other thing I wanted to bring up as well is you've got a bit of a big celebration coming from your organization's perspective. So there's a bit of a milestone, and I know you've got a lot of marketing plans around that. Could you maybe share a little bit of that, if you don't mind, Morgan?
Yes, the Muscular Dystrophy Association is about to celebrate its 75th anniversary. That is 75 years of really transforming lives. When the organization was founded, and it was mostly founded around Duchenne muscular dystrophy, those little boys, it predominantly affects boys, would not would rarely make it through adolescence before they succumb to the disease. And now boys with Duchenne are growing up to have their own children. They're going to college and they're starting careers, and they have very fulfilling lifetimes ahead of them. And what we'll be celebrating this year is legacy, impact, and momentum. Um, the legacy as really the organization that started crowdfunding. The MDA telethon of years past that Jerry Lewis hosted for years and years was, in fact, crowdfunding, wasn't it? Um, and that has served us really well over the years. We've seen how that's evolved. We're celebrating the legacy of families who are with us today. There is somebody on my team who lives with a neuromuscular disease called spinal muscular atrophy. And she was a child, and she was featured on the telethon years and years ago. And she grew up to have a great career in IT. And at some point, she was looking to make a change. And talking to my boss, the CEO at MDA, he said, I have an idea. And she came on board and established our Quest media platform, which is blogs, podcasts, newsletters, social media. And she was so effective as a storyteller and as a motivator in this community. The audience really grew beyond the behind the neuromuscular disease community, that is our core service community, into other areas and other disease groups that have disabilities, and their mobility is affected. And she was so successful at bringing new people into the fold to advocate for access and inclusion, employment opportunities, representation in the arts, all of these wonderful things that were on her wish list for the world she wanted to see. Now she's building it, and now she serves us. She still is on top of her Quest Media empire, but we've made her the vice president of disability outreach and engagement because of her skill in saying, get on board, this is going to be so cool, but we need you. So, that to me is such a great story of legacy and connection over the years of her lifetime. MDA has always been so present, and we hear that a lot from a lot of our families. And that is something to celebrate. And that is something for us to be enormously grateful for. And we try to show our gratitude every day. But this year, we are really going all out to thank the people who have walked this path with us, and who have created this incredible momentum towards cures, towards inclusion and access, and creating a community that says, we're here, we have opinions, we have a voice, and nothing for us without us. We want to be at the table when you're talking about what comes next for us in our community.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Morgan. I love that. It's obviously connection and community. I mean, it's such a powerful message and story. And look, congratulations to the organization. This 75 years, that's a big milestone. I had a little wry smile as you were talking when you're talking about telethons. There's a whole generation coming through that have no idea what a telethon is, probably.
That's right.
Um, but you're right, it was the original crowdsourcing, I suppose. Yeah, that's fantastic to see that. It brings me nicely on to the next thing, which is how you go about planning. Obviously, in your role, you've got an awful lot of moving parts all the time. But when it comes to the next 6 to 12 months, you've obviously got this big campaign. But how do you go about planning for that? What's on your roadmap? What's on your horizon? What are you thinking about? And what are you hoping to achieve as you look forward over the next 12 months, Morgan?
I'm glad you said that, and I'm glad you put it in a 6 to 12 month time frame, because the CEO and I were just talking about strategic planning and how difficult it is to have a long-term forecast with all of the vagaries of the world that we're in right now. And we do tend to chunk it out 6 to 12 months, maybe a year on the outside, maybe depending on the initiative, 18 months. But it's hard to look beyond that time frame because things are changing so amazingly and so quickly. We gather quarterly for comprehensive reviews of our goals and objectives. What's changed? What's no longer relevant? Because in this world that we live in, and for me, particularly in the marketing space, things could change in a 6 month time frame pretty extravagantly. And my CEO, in fact, our entire executive team really believes that if an adjustment is made in one person's strategy, there are implications for the rest of us. So we do tend to stay very tightly connected about changes, about forecasting, about switching. We have to move faster. We have to pull back. And so we communicate to each other all the time on where we're sitting. And we are heading into 2025 with the presidential election ahead of us. That could mean a lot of significant changes either way. And so we're trying to make sure that we could stay ahead of that and provide information and resources to our community. The most important thing for them to know, change Change it breeds a really contagious anxiety, and the way we counteract that is by communicating all the time. So, we want to let them know, no matter what changes we make and no matter where we may flex or bend or switch, we are still the same organization with the same values, the same commitment to you, and the same open door for you to come in and be part of this with us. So, um, it's connecting, it's communicating, it's making sure that the right hand is always aware of what the left hand is doing and
Yeah,
bringing the community with us as we shift.
I was going to say, I really like that because on one hand, you're sort of discussing the fact that the ebbs and flows, and you have to be agile and you have to, meet up and make sure that, are we going faster here? Are we pulling back here? What do we need to adjust? What's happening in the wider global scenario, of course. But you're also remaining true to the mission and true to what you value and true to that community and that connectivity. And it's really great and refreshing to hear that. And it's good that you were saying as well, you sort of put it into those different sections, because it's very hard, isn't it? When you think about 18 months from now or 2 years from now, anything could happen. So it's all for change, but it is great to just see from a real-time perspective how you're working in that environment. So thank you, Morgan, for sharing that with our audience today.
Of course.
Before we run out of time, I've got two last questions if I can. The
Please.
first one is there anything that we haven't touched on today that you'd like to share with our worldwide audience? Or it might be something we have touched on that you'd like to expand upon. And secondly, and really importantly, if people want to get in touch with you and your organization, where's the best place to point people to?
Sure. If you're looking to connect with us at MDA, it's www.mda.org. It's a really robust website that we're constantly improving and adding bells and whistles to. You can use that platform to sign up for a subscription to Quest Media. You can make a donation. But I really encourage people to read about the work we're doing. And by the way, take a look at our recognitions and accreditations from watchdog agencies that have lauded us for our transparency and good fiscal practices. And I would, no matter what your philanthropic interest is, you need to do that homework and you need to really understand that the organization that you're giving to or supporting is transparent in its reporting and has been recognized by independent third parties for doing so. If you'd like to reach out to me, I'm really active on LinkedIn. I think that's my social media hub, and I'm at linkedin.com/in/Morgan is on point, all one word. And I would love to hear from fellow marketers and nonprofit aficionados and anybody from the neuromuscular community that is looking for community and looking to connect with our programs and services.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And that brings us nicely, Morgan, to the end of our discussion today on this episode of the Global Discussion. Before we wrap up, I just want to thank everybody who's been watching and listening to our conversation around the world. I'm going to ask them to like, follow, subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support the show. And go and check out everything over at MDA and all the great work that Morgan and the team are doing over there. Go and take some time to have a little look at that. And make sure that you join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Morgan. But thanks for being on the show, Morgan. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you again today.
A pleasure for me too. Thank you.